Thanks so much. So my name is William Balbeen. I'm a venture capital investor. We're currently the #1 most active VC in the world and #2 in Asia. And very happy to be here to talk about digital banking and the impact that it's having on the markets overall in Southeast Asia. So quickly, we're just going to have our amazing panelists introduce themselves quite briefly, and then we'll kick off. So Eduard, please introduce yourself.
Sure, good morning, and thanks for having us here, and good morning to my fellow panelists. So I'm Eduard, Fabian, CTO for Razer Fintech. Joined Razer about 1 year ago, and excited to move from the incumbent banks to a new starter, and hopefully a bank soon.
Wonderful. Pauline?
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. So I run an internal venture at Boston Consulting Group called the Fintech Control. Looks at developing market research and insights on fintech. So it's a tool that we'll be bringing to the market next year.
Wonderful. And Sheyantha?
Hi, good to be with you guys this morning. So my name is Sheyantha Abeykoon. I run the financial services group for Razer Digital. Primarily two companies. One is our large payment platform Boost, and our alternative credit company Aspirasi. Been in digital for almost 7 to 8 years now, mainly in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and very excited about today's discussion.
Wonderful. So, I mean, we've seen a lot of action. Back, 15 years, we had huge investment in VC into internet, and the internet disrupted the incumbents at that time, the telcos. Over the last 10 years, starting 8 to 10 years ago, you had a lot of investment into fintechs and challenger banks. And now within the financial industry, I think we're looking at 20% of the total global market value in the financial industry is from fintechs and challengers. And the traditional financial institutions, their market value have shrunk from basically 100% down to 80%. So a huge amount of action. We recently had we have Ant Financial coming out. And so we're going to kick off with Pauline. If you could just give us a kind of a brief global overview, and then what you're seeing as the landscape currently in Southeast Asia, and then we can dig in from there. Pauline?
Yeah, I'd love to. So look, as it's really fresh off the shelf, we just finalized a piece with the Singapore Fintech Association, looking really in view of the licenses in Singapore being announced later this year, the 5 licenses. So what we did is that we categorized what's a digital challenger banks, right? Because you need to compare apples with apples, not comparing here digital wallets or mobile wallets. And what we call a digital challenger banks are those who are challenging the incumbent. And there are 4 categories, of which 2 main ones, which is challenger banks, fully banked. These guys have a fully banked license. So they can be fintech banks, like for example, your Revoluts, your Monzos, also non-FIO consortiums. And here is where you have, your WeBank and so on. Then you have neobanks. Neobanks are, for example, your Chimes that would have a partnership with a bank, or your independent. So they have a quasi license that allows them to keep deposits like a Wealthfront would do, rather than having a banking license. So with that in mind, what we've seen is that since 2015, there's been a 200% growth in this classification globally, of which really depending on the regulations, so in the US, for example, there's not a regulation that allows for a digital banking license, really, although it's starting. You see more of this partnership model. In Europe, because of the UK, you have this digital bank challengers that have a banking license, the same in Australia. But in Southeast Asia, we're seeing, well, in Asia generally, we're seeing a different picture with this consortiums, non-FIs coming into the picture. Southeast Asia is also looking really interesting because we don't have a lot of these vehicles to allow for this. So, and with the Singapore banking license, we're going to be seeing some more of these consortiums, non-FIs coming into the picture. Regardless, Southeast Asia is I mean, it's a fintech hotspot, right? And with a lot of payments and lending fintechs, and you've really seen the growth exploded in these guys 2017. And talking back to funding, they really attract the bulk of the funding, payments and lending fintechs. And here, really, what we're seeing is that these these wallets and mobile and digital wallets are really going to account to 1/3 of the entire market of payments, which makes it really exciting. So a very different landscape, but that's about to change with the digital banking license in Singapore, and we were talking earlier about Malaysia and the Philippines.
So Sheyantha, could you walk us through, Asia across payment, lending? It's actually generally ahead of the West, of Europe and the US. And so we might not have the same type of licensing framework across Southeast Asia, country by country. But what are you seeing in terms of actual action? There are licenses to do just about everything that a digital bank or a challenger bank might do in the West. And the user adoption from what we see is much faster, much greater. So what are you seeing on the ground? What are the services that are, in your view, ahead or behind the rest of the world?
Yeah, so Pauline was right. I think fundamentally, Southeast Asia is a hotbed for fintechs now, and most of the fintechs are gravitating towards either payment solutions or lending solutions based on alternative credit models, right? I think fundamentally there's a big structural difference in our markets versus the markets in the West, right? So in our markets there's a large layer of unbanked and also underbanked, both on the consumer side and on the small business merchant side, right? Especially if you take markets like Indonesia. If I take Malaysia, for instance, it's 85% banked, but if you really sort of peel the onion, you find that about another 30 to 40% underbanked. Right. So I think structurally the markets are very different to that in the West. And if I'm to generalize, I find that most fintechs are actually servicing that layer of customers, both on the business side and on the consumer side. So they're not really going after the bank segment, which is by and large where the FIs have been operating, right? And there's a lot of market friction, right? So in our market, for instance, there's a lot of thin file clients, a lot of access to data for, let's say, large FIs to go down the spectrum and really target customers at the bottom of the pyramid, right? And they can't do it under the existing regulatory frameworks. So that's one reason why they've generally stayed away, right, from that segment. And I think Pauline spoke about the digital banking licensing frameworks that are coming out. I think one thing that is sort of common in all the licensing frameworks is there is a general narrative there that the digital banks are expected to really go after the underserved segments, right? So not really go after and cannibalize what the FIs are doing today. So I think from a regulatory and policy perspective, also that's the direction that most policyholders are pushing for. So it's to solve an existing underserved segment in the marketplace as opposed to going and crowding out an already fairly crowded space. So I think that's pretty much what we are seeing on the ground. A lot of what you can do, you're right. A lot of what you can do both on the payment side and on the lending side can be done under some kind of compartmentalized regulation in most markets, right? So if I take Malaysia and Indonesia, where we primarily operate, it can be done. I think the big swing factor is, you cannot deposit mobilize, where the regulatory thresholds are much higher. And there is a case, if you look at the business case for a lot of fintechs, if they want to sort of graduate to the next level, they need to be able to offer that full spectrum of services, right? So I think that's the big delta, and that's why a lot of fintechs have expressed interest in a lot of these, a lot of the regulations that have come out in the last 12 to 18 months.
Sounds good. Eduard, going to you. I mean, you guys are on the cutting edge. What are the actual use cases? I mean, you have investors like me or Pauline on the consulting side talking a lot about regulation and frameworks. But for actual end users, what are people? What's hot right now, and what are you guys focused on?
We're focusing on what we call youth and millennials, and really want to take it down in age. And really become the lifestyle companion, we call it, for kids who grow up. And of course, initially parental supervision, and then becoming adults, and bringing them into the financial services world through education, through financial services that are transparent, ethical as well, and aligned with their values. Because we feel this segment is underserved, and it's underserved both on the B2C side and also on the B2B side. So we know these days that young graduates don't necessarily want to take a big job in a company or even a smaller company. What they want to do is start their own startup. And when you look at opening a bank account for a startup or for an SME, it's very, very laborious. Accessing credit is very, very hard as well. So we believe that if you look at them differently, bank them from a personal banking point of view, and then bank them from a startup banking point of view, there are many, many synergies as well. And we can offer services which they cannot get from the incumbents. And then from a Razer point of view, we know this segment really well with our gaming background. And we know that youth and millennials, 70% out of them are gamers. We are very, very closely in tune with what they want, what they need. And we want to pivot from the gaming side of things. And, we even have Razer Pay today, which is focused on payments for youth and millennials, and really broaden it much beyond gaming, broaden it into other lifestyles, other segments later as well.
Can you just jump in and give an example of, you've been on board a year now, something that surprised you, an actual use case that you were not expecting, whether it be gamers starting their own businesses or whatever? Can you give an example or some numbers around it? That would be great.
Yeah, we organized the hackathon about 2-3 months ago. And what we wanted to prove is that we can put together a partnership and an open banking platform together with AWS, Mambu, Perks, and so on. And we partnered with SMU here in Singapore. And when we reached out, we didn't really know if it's going to be successful or not. But we had more than 200 teams sign up for the hackathon. And then we had to select down to 100, we let in 120 teams. And 75 of the 120 teams, they created viable banking solutions over a weekend. This is in 48 hours. So what surprised us here is not only the fact that you have all these folks interested in doing it, but the level of ideas that came out of there. And the winners of the hackathon, they had products and services that we didn't really think about, and you wouldn't think about them traditionally as a financial service. It's not a credit or not a card and so on. But what they came up with are very, very relevant. And I can tell you the winners came up with a subscription management model. And it's something that we want to build into Razer Pay and eventually into Razer Youth Bank if we get the license, right? So there are many, many needs out there, unmet needs. There are many, many ideas out there. It's just a matter of fostering them and bringing them into the platform.
Okay, great. And then Pauline, turning to you. I mean, you're an internal resource, so that's where you're launching, but your clients are generally large institutions. So how are to the extent you can share, how are the larger or the traditional players looking at this market? Are they going after the millennials and the Gen Z, or are they which areas are they focused on?
Yeah, so look, I mean, actually, interestingly enough, we serve not just the large corporates, but regulators, technology companies, and investors. Just telling Fabian about some of the sleepless nights I've had because of the private equity sector wanting to buy assets. But look, I think what's really interesting, first of all, is to Fabian's point, right? If you look at the consortium of banks that have been put together for Singapore, right? Those are the ones that we know of. You've got retailer, you've got telco, you've got e-commerce, right? Ride sharing, online media, and of course financial services, which is one of the requirements. And what they're doing is that they're leveraging access to customers, access to SMEs, digital users. So, to Fabian's point, they have that frequency of interaction and that digital user and the richness of the data. So I think what I think it's really interesting to point out is that bottom of the pyramid. I think Sheyantha, you mentioned about that, and that's exactly what they're going for. I think we take it for granted that we have bank accounts and we're able to do all the things. Lockdown happened and our banks, we were already set up, right? But if you're not set up, it's probably impossible within the radius. Within the radius that you live, you could spend money most likely, but going beyond that, you can't give or receive money. So that's really the area that they're focusing on. And numbers wise, I think what I still find absolutely amazing is that from by 2030, this East, Southeast Asia block, it's going to be, from a GDP perspective, it's going to be the 6th largest in the world. And also the 4th largest from a population perspective, after China and India and Europe. And when you have an unbanked population of almost 65% in places like the Philippines, Vietnam, and then 50% in Indonesia, it's again to the same point that Sheyantha was saying. It's not against the incumbents. We're here basically going after cash, right? Solving that problem where we're moving cash to digital. So that's really where these guys are going after, and the underserved, like the youth population. The same. I mean, I'm having the same issue right now with my children, with everything going digital. I can't. There's no card for them, right? Got an 11 and 8-year-old. I mean, I'm not going to give one to my 5-year-old, but what do I do with them, right?
Well, we have something for you next year, Pauline.
Fantastic. I have your headphones. I like them very much, so I'm looking forward to moving to financial services.
Yeah, so Sheyantha, can you talk a little bit about what are your end customers actually using the platform for? Is it to play games, or is it for what you would traditionally deem like a banking type service, insurance, financial products? You're on the ground in a number of different countries, and usually they used to be called developing countries or emerging countries, but with mobile first, mobile only, you get that leapfrog effect. So what are you seeing in terms of actual user adoption for the platforms?
Okay, so I think our beachhead into this space was our payment business, right? And I don't really like to define it as a payment business, so which is Boost. And Boost, from a use case perspective, there are almost 25 use cases on Boost. So the anchor, if you like, the anchor use case for us was scan and pay, physical scan and pay, and we went pretty much after the cash, if you like, the cash segment of the market. So small merchants on the merchant side, and again, targeting people who were not more digital natives, who really didn't have a lot of bank accounts on the consumer side, right? So it was scan and pay. It was things like bill payments, top-ups, because we had a telco heritage, eventual parent company is a telco. But now we've branched into a lot of different use cases now, from parking to gaming to e-commerce enablement services, so forth, right? So I think on the payment side, and what we've done then thereby on the lending and the insurance is sort of to cross-sell our lending and insurance products to that same base of customers, either on the consumer or on the merchant side. Our model is actually quite focused on the small business side, so if you like, the merchant side of the ecosystem, because we feel that's where, so on the consumer side, you have a lot of players in that space, right? On the merchant side, we see, especially post-COVID, there's a big push to digitize small merchants. We find that there are a lot of friction and pain points. We understand those merchants quite well. And when I'm talking about merchants, I'm talking about small micro businesses here, monthly incomes of maybe under $10,000, maybe $5,000, right? So that's the segment we've been playing in. And so again, it starts with basic payment services, for small merchants, for settlement accounts, obviously to enable walk-in customers to do scan and pay, but then it branches out into a lot of other ancillary services which can also help a small merchant expand the scope of his or her business, especially in a COVID scenario. So we have some merchants who now started getting onto our bill payment platform. So whenever doing bill payments before, they're looking for new sources of revenue, as with all the challenges of COVID. So that's our approach, and obviously where customers are eligible, they do get credit from us on our lending business, and also we do cross-sell relevant insurance products to both segments of customers.
Okay, is there anything that's not working and that was a surprise, and anything that's been a challenge?
I think, so two things, right? I think one was, I think when we launched insurance, right, I think it was insurance was a little bit of a challenge because we needed to contextualize what we were selling, right? So insurance fundamentally is quite a difficult product to sell, right? Most of insurance still happens on face-to-face selling because people don't have an innate desire to protect themselves, right? So insurance was something where we had to work a lot in, almost contextualizing and making the product very simple and relevant. So for instance, if people pay bills on our platform, they get a bill protection cover. If somebody is running a small business in a COVID scenario, we give them, what we call a key man risk cover, which, most small businesses have up to 2 to 3 people. If, something happens to one of them, 50% of your business volumes typically drop. So we had to come up with products that were very, very relevant for our customer base, and not sort of off-the-shelf products that you find from typical underwriters. And therein also was the opportunity, right? Because we found a market space that was not really catered to. And we find that a lot of other fintechs in the space are also taking quite a similar approach.
Okay. So I spent a year and a half, a glorious year and a half of my life in 2006 and 2007 on the first Alibaba IPO. We recently had Ant Financial. It's the biggest IPO in the history of the world. The intention, I believe, is for them to become the largest financial services platform in the world. Just throwing this out to all of you, or I can choose Edward. But what do you think will be the impact here? How do you compete in a context of not a 100-pound gorilla, but a 1,000-pound gorilla who's got a habit of using money as a weapon? How do you compete or coexist in this when you have a big player who's intent on global domination?
Yeah, so it's an interesting situation. I think, first of all, coming back to some of the conversations, it's all about partnering with the regulators. And I don't know what happened in China, but in our case, we closely partner with the regulators in Malaysia, in Singapore, and in other countries as well. I think that's number one. I think the other one is there is a niche for everybody. And I think technology allows you to personalize things down to a level which is unprecedented. I even heard that some company in the UK is working on a bank for dudes, and the chatbot will have a specific language, right? So in our case, we have about 100 million users in our Razer ecosystem, which we think it's plenty if you do a good job to build a bank for them globally to capitalize on that. And we don't have the ambition to become Alibaba, at least not yet, right? And also, I think the other part is not competing necessarily with the incumbents, but partnering with them and really building out that ecosystem. Because from a customer value point of view, that's where they get the value. So if they come to, let's say, Razer Youth Bank, and they can go through all the journeys that they need from a financial services point of view, and behind Razer Youth Bank, there are all our consortium partners, and maybe there are some of the incumbent banking services as well, that's fine. And also what we're saying, look, we're building something for youth and millennials, but if we don't have a product or a service which suits you, then we can refer you to another organization as we build out as well. So I think it's really about partnership with regulators, partnership with the ecosystem, partnership with some of the incumbent financial services organizations as well.
Okay, anybody else? Pauline, Sheyantha, do you want to take a whack at this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, if you think about it, do we have a global universal bank? Truly, we don't. So I think there's a lot. I mean, similar to, I'm sure, all of you with different backgrounds. I've lived in a lot of countries, from Africa to Latin America, in the US, Europe, and now in Asia. And I have several bank accounts, right? There's a lot of space to make this better. And we are, after all, quite a lot of people in the world. But also, I think with what's happening with COVID, I think something that's really interesting that was discussed yesterday as well with Sopman Dumohanty as well, from the Chief Fintech Officer here in Singapore, is that the recovery is going to be tough, right? And I think the acceleration the digital acceleration is going to have everybody in mind, right? Not just us that are able to stay at home and work from home because we're set up that way. So I think it will be interesting to see what was just happening right now with, and as well with the second wave in the world, how this acceleration plays out after all. I think we were in a path to it. And I think all of a sudden everybody needed to move from cash to digital in a way. But we also need to think about those who are left behind. And I think that's going to be interesting. Another interesting piece that is coming up a lot is data. And we've been able to do a lot of these things, the richness of the data that some of these platforms have are because, we don't have a really, there's no agency that's looking at data across financial services, telco, everything, in a really thoughtful manner. I think that's happening now, and it'll be interesting to see the impact of that.
Just if I can add one point, I think Eduard touched on it. I think when you're building a large, if you like, a universal fintech bank across all markets, and I think Ant is on his way there. I think the relationship with the regulators is key, and regulation is very market by market. It's very market specific, and the market context is also very contextual, right? So it's not as easy to spread your wings across a large expanse of markets very quickly as it is in maybe in another digital industry, right? That's been our experience as well when we've sort of had this debate about going sort of more in market versus going to more footprint markets, right? I think that underscores an important point. Generally, in the regulators tend to take more of a wall-guarded approach when it comes to the financial services industry for obvious reasons, right? So I think because of that, it's not as easy to expand as quickly across multiple markets, and I think local partnerships are quite important now. Some of the big players have done that; they've expanded into markets with JVs and so forth with local players. But I think that would be more the modus operandi because I think local context is very, very important.
So we've seen something amazing through this tough time in COVID. We're active in I think it's Bangladesh and then in Pakistan, and the Alibaba payment platform took them a year and a half, 2 years to get to 2 million users. In the last 5 months, they went from 2 million users to 20 million users. It's a massive acceleration in user adoption of digital, especially around financial services and payment, because nobody wants to touch dirty cash. So I think we're out of time. I really appreciate everybody here sharing. Hopefully it's useful for the audience, and please let's have a safe rest of this year and look forward to a real acceleration in adoption for digital banking and online payment platforms across Southeast Asia. So thank you very much, Pauline, Sheyantha, Eduard. Really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.